Hey guys, I'm a counselor by trade and also a university lecturer. And over the past year, I've been grinding full time in Heads Up No Limit. I wanted to introduce you to some ideas that I've found really useful with clients and with students. I thought, hey, I think poker players would appreciate this. So this is a bit unusual. Really, the ideas, especially today, are more like spirits of practice, more like ways of having conversations with people. And I've kind of turned them into something else. So it's a bit unusual for me in a sense, but I'm excited about it. So who we are as poker players, what we do, the decisions we make, the actions we take, all this stuff is influenced by the stories that we tell about ourselves. Here's some things which happened to me. I bust my roll last summer and I dropped to playing only my lowest stake. I became results oriented and frustrated at the tables, or more than normal. And I took 2 weeks off. These three connected events, which I pulled out of a sea of events to fit into a sequence across time according to a plot, which by definition is a story. And in this case, these events fit quite neatly into a story which is already ripe and available to me, which is that I don't have what it takes to succeed in poker. The story is so well developed, it's a kind of saga with various contributing volumes. And here are some extra titles. These are recurring events, really, which are easily absorbed into the story that I don't have what it takes to make it as a poker player. Baffled by Fish. This is a story which really blossomed last year. Those who study with me or have coached me will know this. I observed in myself a tendency to preserve mental energy by autopiloting, or even, to my disgust, actively resisting reflection against recreationals. I wasn't analyzing the game carefully. Instead, I'd pigeonhole them into really general categories, thinking in generic terms like, he's super passive, he's a maniac. So these guys that should have been, or these opponents that should have been my most lucrative opponents by far, but I dropped the ball again and again. So the story here, this is about skill and about performance and mistakes and things that are really worthy and important to reflect on and review. But the identity story, which I lived this in, was this not good enough saga. I don't have what it takes to succeed in poker. Yeah. Here's another one, another recurring event in the series. Real poker players don't feel things or shouldn't feel things. Um, you'll be shocked to hear that I experience tricky thoughts and feelings every day. And this happening clashes with these broader constructs that I have or that I'm caught up in about being a poker player, being a man, being a professional, and so on and so on. On some level, it's easy for me to buy into the idea that I should keep a resting Stephen Chidwick face in every situation. I should be able to experience variance as if it was as natural as the rise and fall of a wave. But I don't. For me, I like to cringe, I sigh, I sweat, I pray, I groan, and I get discouraged and depressed. And um, to the delight, I'm sure, of any of my opponents, if they're in the session today, another recurring event which fits into the story that I don't have what it takes to succeed is a collection of my many adventures, hero calling in underbluff spots. Maybe you have this too. So it's a big river spot. I have a 0 EV call in theory, and I'll even think, yeah, people don't find enough bluffs here. Or this guy definitely doesn't find enough bluffs here. But maybe this one time he's found a reason to go for it. Even when a simple population node lock would show that the call is clearly minus EV, I still find it. Again, this story too, it's got a straightforward technical game component, but it also has a lot of enmeshment with hopes, desires, fears, all that sort of stuff. It's really a what's wrong with me kind of story, which fits nicely with these other ones into the big I don't have what it takes to make it in poker story. So now we can return all this to this diagram. On the bottom half, you'll see I've got this landscape of action with all the events that we can choose from. And on the top half, the landscape of meaning and identity. These are the stories, the identity conclusions that these events get collected into. And the blue dots are just events that haven't been highlighted because they don't fit into this story. So if it's okay with you, let's just take one of these events which didn't feature in the story. This one, for example, is that during this time, so remember, I'd bust my roll, I'd reloaded just enough to play at my lowest stake, but I was frustrated in my gameplay and took some time off. During that period as well, I maintained a routine of study and reflection. And here's another. At this time, I opened up to my partner about the situation I was in. And these two events, which don't really fit into this particular story very well, taken together with all the other events highlighted, can actually fit into a story like I'm a poker player on a journey. I think this is a reasonable conclusion to draw from all of those events combined together. And it's not that it's truer than the other story, but this is a story that fits for me and one which serves me much better. I actually just noticed in myself, I just noticed myself standing taller as I as we switch to the slide. I'll quote the therapist and author Alice Morgan here. She's over the ditch in Australia. She says, "Our lives are multi-storied. There are many stories occurring at the same time, and different stories can be told about the same events. No single story can be free of ambiguity or contradiction. No single story can encapsulate or handle all the contingencies of life." But here's a story of mine, Poker Play on a Journey. It's a what I'd call a I am becoming type story. And every now and again, usually with the help of people that we care about, we get to write these I am becoming type stories where our intentions are witnessed by others and noticed and celebrated and developed. This is all the more powerful because our sense of who we are will tend to guide the how we ought to act in any given situation. If that makes sense, that sense of who we are ends up actually affecting or impacting our sense of how we should act. But yeah, we do very often tend to be in the grip of deficit stories, stories about us lacking something, about us not being something. Another way to describe it would be problem-saturated stories. And these have an enormous gravitational pull. And when these stories dominate, any actions and events that contradict these stories or point to something else, like this one here, a story about I'm becoming, these easily get neglected or tossed aside. It's a bit like a favorite old story of mine that you might have heard before about the drunk guy under the lamppost. So you've got this drunk guy under a lamppost, and a jogger comes along. Jog, jog, yog, yog, yog. Jogger comes along, and he says, "Hey, what you doing?" And the drunk guy says, "Oh, I'm looking for my keys." And the jogger offers to help. He says, "Well, where did you last have them?" He says, "Over there in the bushes." So why are you looking here then? And the drunk guy says, "Because the visibility is better." The pull to make sense of life in terms of available problem stories is incredibly strong. I think we're like moths to a flame in this respect. We're always missing keys that are out of sight in the bushes. And I think we often need a kind of a disruption, or especially help from others to explore the landscape of our own lives in different ways. So this is really the kind of the main point I'm bringing today to cloak the other things that we're talking about. And this highlights to me that it makes a difference how we story events, and especially how we talk about the problems in our lives. From my experience working alongside people in counseling, I know that how we talk about our problems matters a ton. It matters a lot. We don't make up identity stories so much as piece them together from the stories that are available, and acceptable within our own world of influence. Um, I guess that in a technical sense, you could say that we enact our own versions of the stories made available to us and our communities. And stories about us or others being the problem and failing to perform at some standard in life are super available, sitting there just waiting with open arms. And then what happens when you believe that you are the problem, and that there's really something wrong with you? Well, it becomes really difficult to take action. You just end up being preoccupied with yourself and taking action against yourself. So if you want to give yourself a chance at revisiting the stories in your life, then this idea here is really key. And I want to spend some time talking about that today. And that's this idea or this motto: the problem is the problem. It's it seems that it's tautological. It's saying the same thing, but what I mean is the problem is the problem as opposed to the person being the problem. So when we talk about problems and predicaments, we tend to be constrained by dominant ideas and dominant ways of talking, as well as cultural assumptions. That includes assumptions about well-being, about being a person who has it together, someone who handles things, someone who can deal with adversity, all sorts of norms and expectations. And these default parameters constrain how we talk about problems. So let's run the sim with these default parameters, and it worked it out pretty fast. So the problems in your life reveal some truth about you, yourself, your nature, and your character. Or the problems in your life reveal some truth about the nature and character of others, or the nature and character of your relationships. So when you see the problem, you think that's the truth about some inherent quality of either you or others or your relationships. I mean, just think of yourself in a couple as been in a couple for a second, and it'll become apparent straight away. In other words, the common output that you'll get with the default parameters is that your problems are internal to yourself or the selves of others. You are the problem, others are the problem. This kind of understanding, this sort of deficit story, in other words, that there's something not good enough about you, or not good enough about them, or not good enough about your relationship with them, this sort of deficit story shapes the kinds of efforts that you take to resolve problems. And that usually these kind of attempts to resolve the problems often make the problems worse. And then you conclude even more strongly that the problems in your life come from the truths about you. So basically, once you believe your problems are internal to yourself, it just sinks you further and further into the problems that you're attempting to resolve. I want to give you some examples about language. And I know it can be fiddly to or to focus on language, but actually all our understanding is formed through the ways that we talk about things. Yeah. So I think it's really important. Here's some common ways players commonplace ways that we talk about problems in this internalized kind of way. That dude has some serious anger issues. I'm sure you might have heard this in the past few days even. This is just such a common type of thing to say. Or Carolyn or Caroline is a depressive sort of person, as if Carolyn had this eternal essence of being a depressive person. Or I'm a failure, I'm unmotivated, I can never follow through with projects. There's something wrong with me causing these problems. Or she's an addict. That's who she is. How about this guy? He looks so happy. It's contagious. He's a random fish. What a brilliant truth that captures this guy in all his splendor and complexity. Random fish. Or as a clue, anytime you hear words like disordered, dysfunctional, incompetent, inadequate, very popular ways of talking about things in all strata of society. These all belong to this kind of discourse of things having a nature, things having an essence, and problems coming from that nature being not good enough, basically. Again, if we come to believe we're the problem, there's something wrong with us, it becomes difficult to take action, and it's demoralizing. So, I'd like to offer to you an alternative way of talking about problems and predicaments called externalization. Instead of thinking that the person is the problem, as we've been discussing and as represented by this diagram on the left, instead of thinking that the person is the problem, we talk about the problem being the problem. And what we're doing here is objectifying the problem instead of objectifying the person. What happens is it makes it possible for people to experience an identity which is separate from the problem. When we talk in this externalized kind of way, the problem stops being understood as the truth about people's identities, and then problem-solving options become more visible and more accessible. That's why I like to use this phrase, opening up space through externalization. Person is not the problem is the problem. I hope that's a memorable takeaway from today. Even if you end up thinking it's wacky, I hope it's memorable. Here's some examples of this externalized way of talking that might play itself out at a language level. If I think to myself, I'm not cut out for this, and I want to objectify the problem instead of me, I might say something like, this sense of inadequacy really shows up when XYZ happens. When I'm on Zoom. No, the sense of inadequacy really shows up when this and that happens, which already involves a bit more detail to be able to reflect on, yeah? He's a sore loser. Disappointment really grabs hold of him in these spots. And I want to say as a disclaimer, I know this might seem a bit naff at first, and it may even seem like we're abdicating responsibility by talking about problems in this way. But I do want to say, in my experience, it's the complete opposite. Once a problem is seen as external to yourself, it makes it easier to see what the problem is, what its effects are, and especially to see your relationship with the problem, your relationship to the problem. And that little bit of space can be super empowering to take actions that are more in line with what you really deeply care about and hold to be valuable. While externalizing problems enables you to separate yourself and your relationship from such problems, it doesn't separate you from responsibility for the extent to which you participate in the survival of the problem. In fact, as these practices help you become aware and describe your relationship with the problem, they enable you to assume responsibility for the problem, which might actually be a new thing. And to highlight this point even more, I'd add that this way of working is acknowledged in this part of the world. So I can't remember if we mentioned that I'm in New Zealand. Like the proof is that it's 6:25 a.m. here. So in New Zealand and Australia, this kind of approach that I'm sharing um, has been seen to be very effective. But specifically, it's acknowledged in this part of the world as one of the most effective approaches in working with men to reduce violence and abuse. So I just wanted to add that I'm not presenting some fluffy notion. There's real change that's happened to real people who thought they'd exhausted every avenue and where everything seemed to have turned to shit and in desperate, dangerous situations. So, yeah, I want to imagine my knee-jerk reaction to hearing this concept, I think, would be along these lines. So I wanted to add that in. It's actually an invitation to responsibility once you externalize problems. All right. I'm useless versus the feeling of uselessness shows up strongest for me after a losing session. That's, I'm kind of trusting that everyone here feels this way, no matter how advanced you are in your meditation practice or whatever you're up to. No matter how deeply loved you are by the people around you. All right. Caroline is a depressed person. Carolyn says she's been in a fog of depression since losing her job. And how about this one? Villain is an aggro fish. Well, his strategy has clear leaks. His strategy has him not splitting hands across the game tree effectively, struggling to react to Hero's big adjustments against him, and favoring the aggressive option on many nodes. And hey, in addition, when winning or deeper stacked, he tends to tighten up. There's a lot there. It's just a lot more of a nuanced understanding of what's happening for our lovely opponent here. And by the way, I'm indebted to Corey Mikesell here. He has an article on his website called Beating Fish in Omaha, which I couldn't resist purchasing off his website, even though I don't play Omaha. And I feel comfortable plugging him because I know he's a coach for one-on-ones. And but yeah, fish operating according to some strategy. It shouldn't be a revolutionary idea, but I actually really enjoyed his thoughts on the meta. And just seems to be an all-round brilliant thinker. Um, yeah. So yeah, the fish can be the fishiest fish that ever did fish. But the fact is, he'll be operating according to some kind of strategy, some form of tendencies, and you, as a player, have a responsibility to figure this out as accurately as possible and adjust. That's the game. That's what it's about. Or you could just shrug and call him an aggro fish. Yeah. It's a description. It's just what we call in the trade a very thin description. Like, what a naughty child, or she's just an attention seeker. Thin descriptions. We want thicker descriptions. All right. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to provide an example of going through a process of externalizing problems.